today's webinar, Inside the Waterworks, Heritage, Housing, and Social Infrastructure, and a 2025 ULI America's Award for Excellence winner. My name is Salima Raji. I'm President and CEO at the York University Development Corporation. I also happen to be the chair of the ULI District Council at the moment. As people start to join us here today in our webinar, we're going to just play a quick ULI Toronto video.
Inevitable. Some things come whether you want them to or not. Fall and winter, traffic and email. Change is inevitable. Good times are followed by bad times, and bad times feel like they'll go on forever. But not all inevitable things are bad. Renewal is inevitable. And the thing is, renewal never comes by accident. It's what happens when people think, work, and build together. ULI Toronto is where city builders of all kinds meet as equals to shape better urban places. Anyone who's been part of it will tell you, ULI is special, maybe even magical. But it's not magic. It's people working together in a special ULI kind of way. Thinking collaboratively, building responsibly, and dreaming hopefully. When we come together to imagine our city, renewal is inevitable.
Welcome back once again. My name is Salima Raji, President and CEO at the York University Development Corporation and the Chair of ULI Toronto District Council. As we begin, we always like to start with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land that we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We also acknowledge and honor those who came here involuntarily, particularly those who were descended from those brought here through enslavement. And quickly, in case you were not aware, I also wanted to speak before speaking about the ski day about a role that ULI Toronto plays as a secretariat of a fast-growing coalition of companies and organizations and who are members of the award-winning Accelerating Accessibility Coalition. I'm excited to report that we have met our goal to grow our coalition to 100 companies and organizations by the end of 2025, and that last week we marked our third-year anniversary of this important industry initiative. Related to this is another milestone event, our fourth annual ski day on Thursday, February 12th, this year combined with the Spinal Cord Injury Ontario. The last day to sign up for the ski day is February 4th. Join us for a fun day of skiing. Of course, you always typically hear me talk about our sponsors because we cannot do our work without our sponsors. The impact of the ULI Toronto programming throughout the year is really dependent on their commitment to us and their support. They enable us to convene across sectors, elevate our best practices, and foster informed dialogue on the most pressing land use challenges facing our region. This is more than sponsorship. It's a partnership rooted in shared purpose. Together, we're able to deliver thoughtful programs, credible research, and meaningful opportunities for engagement across our 2,000-person network in Toronto. On behalf of ULI Toronto staff and leadership, we want to thank these companies, truly thank these companies for their continued confidence in our mission. Their partnership underpins everything that we do. And then now onto our webinar. I have a huge smile on my face because this is a really special project to me personally. Today's webinar is to honor the 2025 ULI America's Award for Excellence winner, which has been acknowledged as a premier, which acknowledges across North America premier examples of adaptive reuse, community integration, and heritage preservation in this project. This project was developed by Mod Developments and Woodcliff Landmark Properties with design by Diamond Schmidt. The project transformed a 1930s industrial building into a mixed-use hub featuring a food hall, YMCA, and affordable housing and luxury housing. The project was recognized for setting a high standard in urban development for its holistic approach to creating vibrant and inclusive urban spaces by conserving and transforming an industrial Art Deco Waterworks building into a vibrant mixed-use destination. It thoughtfully integrates a contemporary food hall, a fully serviced YMCA, residential units, including affordable housing, and a youth shelter, all while preserving and celebrating heritage architecture. By knitting these diverse uses together, the Waterworks breaks down socioeconomic barriers, it enhances public realm, and contributes measurably to the life of the neighborhood, setting a benchmark for design excellence, adaptive reuse, and inclusive urban regeneration. And before I introduce two of my colleagues on the winning consortium, I will just note my personal involvement in the project. It was a landmark project for then Build Toronto, now Create TO. And I had the great pleasure of working this project from its infancy, from before it was born, to the final, picking the final consortium and working through the process with the team that you'll hear from today. So it is near and dear to my heart, and I'm excited to share some of those stories with you and my colleagues here as we work through this webinar. And secondly, with great excitement, that ULI Toronto is hosting our 8th annual Winter Social at the Waterworks, giving everyone an opportunity to actually visit our site here and enjoy this award-winning project. And with that, I will introduce to you Gary Switzer, Chief Executive Officer of Mod Development, and Don Schmidt, Principal at Diamond Schmidt Architects.
Thank you, Sulima.
Good. Thank you, Sulima. If I can just get permission to share. There we go. Do you see my screen?
Yep.
Great. I'll just go full screen and hand it off to Gary Switzer.
Thank you. So I'm going to start off with telling you a little bit about the site history. And when we first got involved, what I found interesting about this site, which is it's halfway between Bathurst and Spadina on the south side of Richmond Street. It's an entire city block. And I've lived in Toronto all my life, and I've driven by this building all the time, but I never knew really what was going on in that building or how actually magical it was. When we started getting involved and I did research on the site, I saw that this is a block that actually has been in public ownership since 1837, when the government of Upper Canada gave the land to what was the newly formed city of Toronto to use it as a public space and a park. And the public space was going to be the West End Market to match the East End Market, which was the St. Lawrence Market, and the sort of North Market, which was the St. Patrick Market on Queen Street. So you can see right in the middle, to the left of this picture, was the original building, which I think, if I can make a comparison to St. Lawrence Market, that was kind of their version of the St. Lawrence Hall, which also included a police station and offices. This Romanesque Revival addition was added probably around 1900. And you can see at the far right, that's St. Andrew's Playground, which was actually Toronto's first supervised playground. And the next slide. Now, the market fell on hard times, and as all too common in Toronto, the buildings got demolished. And reason it fell on hard times was because the area had really transformed into an industrial area, and the market had gone bankrupt. The city still owned the land, and in the early 30s, which, as we know, was the beginning of the Depression, they decided to do a make work project and demolish the existing Victorian buildings. And the next slide, build this Art Moderne, Art Deco public works building, which was actually designed by the city architect of the time, and whose name escapes me, but
J.J. Wolna.
thank you, thank you. And he was also the architect that did the Horse Palace down at the CNE and a lot of very, very handsome buildings. If we look at it from an architectural point of view, it's kind of very stripped down, kind of Depression era Art Deco. This is not, the exuberance of the Chrysler Building or South Beach in Miami, and it's an entire block. So, and the next slide. By the 1950s, the windows on the south side had been bricked in. About 20% of the park had become a parking lot, and the skylights on top were all covered with plywood, and basically was being used as a machine hall to make fittings for pipes. Like this is for the water department. This is not like the pumping station out at in the beaches. And even then, I think the city kind of struggled in terms of, okay, what do we actually do with this building? And the next slide. When we came onto the site, this is what was the former machine hall looked like. Skylights covered up, windows bricked in. But what was amazing about it was the fact that it had such a grandeur to it that I felt, here I've lived in Toronto and I had no idea this space even existed. And of course, it had overtones of the St. Lawrence Market or of even almost like a train station. And our minds started working, overtime in terms of, okay, how do we transform this building? And the next slide. So this is getting into Dawn's section, but what I'll briefly say is that we were given a very complicated program from Create.to, which is what in those days was Build Toronto, and the project manager was a woman named Salima Raji, who said, this is what the city is looking for on this site. And of course, we went to the best architect around, which is Don Schmidt. And we said, okay, let's see if we can work this very complicated program that involves multiple uses and heritage and a redesigned park and do amazing residential. So I'll turn it over to you, Don, as you can walk everybody through the project itself.
Okay, thank you, Gary. I think this slide is, I think Gary makes a very important point about a complex mix of uses that we integrated in a holistic way to create this really mixed-use hub within a neighborhood south of Richmond, west of Spadina, that was really burgeoning in terms of new residential construction, new life, but without necessarily all of the kind of social and community-based infrastructure that could really support a healthy community. What you see here is the original children's playground, completely restored, the parking lot that Gary mentioned removed, and the landscape redesigned by Dutoy Alsop Hillier architects working with the city, who obviously own this property. And the park becomes a very important outdoor crossroads for this project. Immediately to the right of or the north of the park, of course, is the great hall that was, as Gary mentioned, was used for the fabrication of Waterworks piping. You can see the restored skylights, you can see the green roof, you can see windows lowered so that views between this fantastic space that stretches a very long city block, east-west, can open into the park. And that became the possibility for creating a great food hall with more than 30 separate food vendors, which will show you that really animate the grade level of this space. Above that, you can see setbacks so that the skylights continue to operate within the restored food hall. 300 units of housing, including affordable units and market units in 2 wings that surround a mid-level courtyard. And that within the height limit established by the city, a very desirable and we think great combination of market and affordable units within the block. In the very lower right-hand corner, Eva's Phoenix, a social service agency, was incorporated, and within the new construction, a full-service YMCA gym and pool that really serve the community as a whole. This is a plan that really locates the building within this emerging and strengthening residential community. And you can see how in the drawing that really captures the extent of the heritage fabric which wraps the whole site from Richmond south to the park, east and west. All of that, much of that heritage envelope, as well as the Great Hall's interior, are retained and kept as part of the project. We worked with ERA architects in doing that. And you can see the extension with the yellow lines of mid-block connections, north-south and east-west, that create greater porosity for the community to move through the building at the ground level in particular, and the integration of a whole range of different functions in that plan, but really combining outdoor space and indoor space in a sort of porous way. If we zoom in on the exterior, you see in black the exterior walls of much of the retained heritage fabric, and together with the new structure to support residential above. You can see at the heart, number 4, the square of a mid-block courtyard that really captures north-south views from Queen Street and Richmond all the way up to Kensington Market, north-south views and access connecting to the park at the bottom of the plan. And then, of course, the great hall, great food hall, east and west, with an outdoor court on the right-hand side, the east side, where it says number 2, sort of outdoor seating space that's connected directly to the food hall. The integration of loading docks to serve the food hall, the integration of the YMCA, which enters off Richmond, but is at the 2nd and 3rd floor. Eva's Phoenix on the right-hand side of the image, number 5 being a food-related or a food restaurant, all food-related retail at the ground floor. The weaving together of all the service functions, loading and servicing, quite complex in terms of resolving the components. In this exploded diagram, it shows from the bottom of the plan, you see the food hall and its skylights. You see all of the service spaces, lobbies for the residence tower number 4, accessed off Richmond using the existing Deco architecture as its signature entrance. but combining that with restaurants as well as the open food market, the youth shelter, Eva's Phoenix, that you can see on the east side. And then at the second and third floor, in the sort of grayish blue, you see the YMCA, full service YMCA, and I'll show you photographs of that. Then above the YMCA, amenity spaces for the residence tower, exercise space, as well as residential units, opening into a fourth floor south-facing courtyard, full of sun, full of great views. And then you can see the U shape of residential units, generous residential units with large outdoor spaces above. So quite a complex vertical stack. You saw this image before. Then as we start to look through the building of the Waterworks, as found, as Gary said, and here we see it restored. You see in the right-hand image, the skylights restored, the range of seating for patrons, the several dozen food service offerings that are really, I encourage all of you to go and eat some of the fabulous foods that are available within the space. Integrating artwork in the suspended within the space, and you see on the left-hand side, as Gary described, the windows that were bricked up, we restored, working with ERA to find the right window framing and opening right down so views from the former industrial space connect the outdoor park to the indoor food hall. So major public space that is really delivering something very exciting in the way of food in the city. You can see in this image from the park side how those windows come down to grade to allow visual porosity, but actual access, so you can go and get a great food and bring it out in good weather to sit. Chairs, planting, really restoring and reimagining the park space, all within the restoration of the heritage brick development. You can see the relationship looking from the south at the restored heritage and the transformed heritage with the levels of residential above. And you can see on the residential not only the configuration of the building as a whole, but very large, very usable balcony space that really enhances residential life in the city with large spaces that can be furnished externally. The food hall at the east, we took advantage of what used to be loading facilities to make outdoor cafes that connect directly into the food hall, an important point of access from the east. And you can see the residential above in the background, the restored heritage fabric, another view of that same condition, really becoming a kind of mature part of the city. Along Richmond Street to the north, the restored heritage, all 2 and 3 stories, primarily 2 stories, setbacks of about 3 meters between the heritage facades and the new YMCA, which are the floors immediately above, and then residential above that. And you can see we took advantage of the heritage architecture to create places for restaurant with both sidewalk seating along Richmond Street, but entry into Susser Lee's restaurant that on its north side opens to Richmond and on its south edge opens to the indoor courtyard. You can also see on the right-hand side of the image an old vehicle carriageway that extend really on axis with Augusta Avenue that extends to the north. We opened that no longer for vehicles, but as pedestrian access through the mid-block point of the building. So really making that porosity and accessibility from all sides of the building. You can see at the ground, in this ground floor plan, with Richmond Street at the north on the top, that in white, that mid-block carriageway coming into the mid-block courtyard, from which you then enter the food hall that's just immediately adjacent to the park. Very important operationally is on the left-hand side of the plan, number 8, the kind of loading dock that serves food, the YMCA, the 300 residential units. You can imagine that getting that logistical support correct was critical to make this function effectively and efficiently, as well as number 9, providing below grade parking to really support the residential and uses. You can see how number 6 integrates the entrance to the residential lobby from Richmond to its east or to the right, number 5, which is the entrance to the YMCA on the 2nd and 3rd floor. And we even get a good grade-related retail at the corner of Maud Street and Richmond, where it says number 4 on the upper left-hand corner. These are 2 cross sections that show some of the complexity. On the right-hand section, on the very right is Richmond Street. We've cut this through the carriageway, which is now pedestrian walkway, into a courtyard, number 2, in the middle of the plan. And that courtyard not only provides a place for sitting out and public use at grade, it provides natural light in the center of the plan into the YMCA swimming pool and the YMCA gym that are on the 2nd and 3rd floor. You can see those programs, number 3, the grade, 2 floors above grade, 2nd and 3rd floor above grade, and the whole, for example, tank condition of the swimming pool, which is suspended above some of these program uses. On the left-hand side of that particular image, you see the food hall, its skylights, its mezzanine that provides a bar and event space overlooking the food hall, and then all of it supported by below-grade parking to make the programs viable, and below the food hall, a service level that provides staff support, food storage, and so forth. And then residential above. On the left-hand image, it's a section cut east-west. Cut east-west through the plan that shows Maud Street on the left and Eva's Phoenix on the right, with the residential and the residential courtyard, number 6, elevated above that exterior courtyard that lets light into the YMCA programs, which are in the pale gray. This is then that carriageway I was talking about, looking straight south into the courtyard, working with Udo Schliemann and Entro, very interesting ways of just, painting right on in an industrial way, the kind of signage, as you can see from Queen Street, moving straight to the south in the courtyard. This is the courtyard as you're moving south. So very generous space on the left-hand side where it says Lee, that's Lee Restaurant opening, Susser Lee's Restaurant opening into this courtyard, and the Finns with the natural light into the YMCA above, and a sense of the openness to the south, where you can see the sky letting light into this courtyard to make it a bright, sunny space. Just the quality of the court, that courtyard at grade, and you're seeing the gymnasium of the YMCA at the upper level in this elevation. The swimming pool of the Y, a 25-meter pool, beautifully detailed. The collaboration was with MJMA Architects. We did the planning, they did the fit out in a very shared collaborative way. And you can see these big windows that, again, provide light into the pool from the courtyard and views out. On the opposite side of the courtyard, a full gymnasium. You can see in use, beautifully detailed, big walls of glass that are letting east light, in this case, into the building and into the gymnasium to make this a really fantastic place for as a crossroads for fitness and recreation. Looking along Richmond Street, you see how the street frontage is really animated by the restored by the restored 1932 building, the kind of beautiful deco detail, very simple and restrained, as Gary said, but very impactful with the YMCA spaces above, and then the residential above that. So a kind of interesting mix of taking advantage of the beautiful detailing of that building to create the residential entry, the Waterworks entrance that you see here on Richmond Street. And on that intermediate second sort of upper level, the fourth level, the residential wraps around an outdoor courtyard, south facing, overlooking the park. But this is dedicated space for the residents of the building. So their own outdoor balconies, but then shared amenity space, both at this level, supported by indoor exercise and amenity and club rooms, but also a rooftop amenity space at the 12th level of the building. One of the things we were at pains to make great outdoor space for the residential. These are deep balconies, as you can see. They can be furnished. They become outdoor living spaces that really extend the indoor qualities of the units that are very carefully crafted and designed. Very beautiful spaces and views. And again, on that courtyard, looking to the south, you can see the kind of long views, the access to sunlight over the course of the day, great planting, the restored skylights. And a lot of the issues, for example, just in the very, very low left-hand corner, you see louvers dealing with the issues of how do you have a 30-plus food service facilities, not only loading in and out all their materials, but the cooking smells, managing that in a very thoughtful way to make sure that there's no contamination of the air quality or smells that affect the residential. So having to think very proactively about how to solve all of these issues. So I think that's maybe leaves us about 30 or 25 minutes for Q&A. And I'll turn it back to Salima, but I think the issues of the weaving and complexity of this mixed use, integrating heritage and public space, both from a development perspective and an architecture and engineering perspective, to create a great mixed use community hub is some of the issues we're happy to focus on. Thank you.
Thank you, Don and Gary. Do you want to take the slides down or should we leave them up? Up to you. I maybe wanted to start the Q&A component of the discussion as people start thinking about their questions, and some of them are popping into the chat, which I'll pose to you, with maybe a little bit of an anecdote about my involvement in the project and the first time I got involved when the city had declared this land surplus to city needs and it was being handed over to Build Toronto. And I had the chance I was assigned to the file, and it was my role to say, what does the city see its vision to be on this project? And, go make it happen and ensure the objectives of the city are met. But importantly, at that time, was also the idea of monetization. So we knew from the start that we needed to bring in private sector uses, private development, but walking through that Great Hall space, you instantly knew that we had to do something for the public. And so what was it going to be? And my first experience in that Great Hall space was at that time, the city's current use was using it to store stationery. So just boxes and boxes of paper, all kinds of colored paper, different colored paper. And so whenever the city needed paper, they would go to the storage facility at this building, and they would bring it back to City Hall or Metro Hall or wherever it happened to be. And I mean, it's just striking that's going back, I don't know, 14 years or so, that image is just so clear in my mind. And so I had the great opportunity to get to conceptualize what the project was going to be, and then invite the development community to come in and bid on the project. And through that process, met with community, met with the local counselors, tried to understand what were the things that we needed to see in, representing the public sector, and have those be true. And so we came up with the list, Gary, that your team had to respond to. We knew that the height was an important factor that we had to limit, that there was important policy going on, that the densification of the city had already started, and this was an area where we needed to sort of set the community at ease by saying we're going to have height limits. We knew that we needed affordable housing. That was already at that time, so many years ago, such a pressing issue. We knew we had a puzzle piece set in Eva's Phoenix, because we had relocated them from the Ordnance, where they had originally, there's a street called Ordnance down in Liberty Village, where they had originally been located, that we had relocated to do another project, and we had put them here. And so that was a piece. What were uses that were going to be compatible with homeless youth shelter? Not an easy discussion to have, and not an easy thing to ideate around back in the early, 2010, 2012. And then there was just the opportunity of the heritage structure, the opportunity of the park, the opportunity of this incredible building that everyone drove by on this commuter street of Richmond, but didn't actually know what was inside. And so I guess my first question is to you, Gary, to say, you get this incredibly complex list of requirements from the city, and you could have picked up any project you did work on many other files at the time. What compelled you and your team to say, we want to take on this really hard thing? And I'll say one more thing, which is, a lot of people told me I was crazy. I sat in the Build Toronto boardroom, and all of the smart real estate developers that we were taking input from rolled their eyes at this young, naive vision that I had. But you said yes, and you pulled it off. Like, what made you want to actually take that first step?
I think it was, I think it's a combination of things, Selena. Is first of all, our company, Mod Developments, had at that point a great deal of experience in dealing with heritage. So heritage did not scare us. We had just done Massey Tower, which restored the old Bank of Commerce building on Yonge Street. We had done the first project we did was 5 St. Joseph, which was the largest facade retention in Toronto at that time, and restored the half a block on Yonge Street. That didn't really scare us. What we loved was the location and the opportunity to do a really great residential building. And I think we also had a vision that this is a neighborhood that there was a lot of, units that had been built previously that were small units that were not the greatest buildings. And we thought, you know what, I think this is an opportunity to do larger units. Like we were doing 1,000 square foot 2 bedrooms. Nobody was doing that. And actually a lot of the agents told us, you're crazy. You're never going to get value for something like that.
We both got the crazy talk.
I know. And also, from a construction point of view, integrating a YMCA, which the spans of double height spaces for a swimming pool and a gym, not only the double height spaces, you're supporting the structure of the condominium above it, and you're having to deal with the impact of these spaces below it. And, maybe at a certain point, you don't know what you don't know, but because we had, Don was, a great architect, we had great engineers. So I think, Paul asked at Jablonski, he helped us, see through the whole, like in the food hall itself, those columns that are on the north side are reproductions of the original steel and brick piers because we rebuilt them to help support the condominium above. So we maintained the heritage look, but at the same time, it allowed us to do, it's not really a cantilever because it does have columns that are supporting it, but we looked at it from the point of view of, oh my God, overlooking a park, facing south. And listen, at the end of the day, it was really the most successful project in that neighborhood. And even today, the rentals and the resales are the highest in the King West submarket because I've talked to people, they say like there's a waiting list almost for everybody wants to be in that building because I think also, I and my partners have always had, everybody uses the phrase community building or city building and stuff like that, but we truly do believe it. And I think that what we've done here is created a true community. The city will use the expression, a complete community. And I think that, what's been very gratifying is like, I've been doing this a lot of years. I don't think I've ever received as many awards for a project as we have for Waterworks. Like we got it from the Canadian Home Builders, which is for across Canada, Heritage Toronto, Urban Design Awards, Build, the Ontario House, like everybody I think has recognized, which is very gratifying because this was a lot of work.
A
We
lot of
started,
work.
like
And
you
so,
started in 2012, we got it in 2015,
yeah.
right?
No, for
Yeah.
sure. And there's some questions about details that we'll come to in the chat, but maybe just to kind of close out this line of questioning around just we talked a little bit, you've talked about like what compelled you to want to work on this file or bid on the file. It was a competitive process. You actually had to put your best foot forward and beat out, there was a lot I can say managing the process that we had a very competitive bid situation, but also how did you, or maybe you can enlighten the audience on, Dawn did a really nice job talking about the integration of the uses in the built form and all the thinking that had to go into that, which was, this deep amount of work. But there's an equal amount of work on the kind of legal and operational side. And can you just maybe give us just 30 seconds on what it means to put all these things together, not just from getting the building right, but all the rest of the aspects that
Well,
require work.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think the lawyers and the surveyors probably made as much money as the architect on this because when you look at the different parts, in a survey where it's a three-dimensional survey, and these exit stairs, these easements, because it is basically one building, and the safety features, in terms of alarms and the code consultant. I don't think he had ever dealt with a building as complex as this, that a lot of times we were hearing, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do this. And we had to keep pushing back. Well, why not? Why can't, even the issue of like sharing stairwells about, is the food hall considered one space or is it considered multiple spaces, which means fire exiting is very different. And we knew that we didn't want to, we had our design vision, but we didn't, a lot of times you almost give up. You say, oh God, okay, I'll just do what they're asking me to do. But I think in a lot of cases, most cases, we pushed back because the design was the most important thing.
Yeah.
But if I could
I just have to say,
if I
sorry,
could just
please
add,
do. Please do.
I'll just add a very brief comment. I think at the core, it's very important to recognize that Gary and his partners understood the value of the heritage, understood the value of the site, understood the value of the complexity. And of programs. And they saw that as an advantage, and that the rest was just, it was problem solving.
Yes.
Not always easy, but just there was an attitude. This is a valuable, they recognized the value of all the pieces and then just rolled up their sleeves and solved the problems and just knocked them off one at a time. And that makes that attitude, I think, was fundamental to the success Gary and his team and partners found.
Thank you so much for that piece. And I feel like we want to come back to some of those heritage elements because they're popping up in the questions. But I do have to acknowledge there's a comment from Linda McDonald, who was the director or the manager on the file from the planning perspective, which was an amazing partner. And it couldn't have happened without the city of Toronto being there next to you and to us at Build Toronto at the time. And she says it's worth noting that the green roofs on the project include a range of pollinator plants to enhance its climate-friendly benefits and also to create beautiful space, a great a precedent for other projects. And so maybe you can both speak to some of the things that you did that were beyond the requirements. One that comes to mind for me, and this goes to a question in the chat, which they say, like, are there any heritage interpretations of the former waterworks or use of the previous 1930s buildings included in the project? And so maybe you can speak to some of the unique decisions that you made quickly, because there's lots of questions to get to, and talk about the floor.
Well, you know what? I'll just jump in and just briefly is one of the heritage attributes that was identified was it had a wood block floor, and we started examining. Okay, could we actually retain this floor? Unfortunately, and you know, I picked up one of the pieces myself. It just reeked from oil. Like all the wood block was contaminated. So what we did was a reinterpretation of the wood block on the grand staircase that goes from the basement to the second floor. We did a wood block wall. You know, we definitely did not want to do a deco, styled new building. But when it came to the heritage, and listen, I'll throw some credit to Sherry Peterson from who has retired. But some things we wanted to do, and she pushed back, and in the end, she was right. You know, in terms of opening up the two ends of the long hall. But in other ways, we pushed, like we went beyond the minimum. Like those windows that are facing the park in the food hall, those are reproduction steel windows. We didn't do, you know, cheap knockoffs of those. Are like the original windows, but they're double glazed now. So that was very important to us, that there be an integrity in terms of, and as well as I'll also mention that in the food hall, one of the first things we told the mechanical engineers is we do not want it like the St. Lawrence Market with these giant ducts in the ceiling. So everything got designed that within the kiosks themselves, there's horizontal transfers into the building, and then it's exhausted through the roof or the side of the building. So if you look up when you're in there, you're looking at the original ceiling.
That's incredible. So when we all go to the winter social, look for the wood block floor on the wall as you walk down into the basement of the food hall. Here's a question, Don. Gorgeous project. How deep are the balconies? Is that going to test your memory?
They're about 2.1 meters in depth.
Natalie Pastushek asks, I love the food hall. Not a lot of places like this in the city. What was the initial inspiration?
Well,
I know it was a requirement in the bid to do something 24.
The bid was just to do, sorry, the bid, the requirement was to do something public, okay?
The bid requirement said a space accessible to the public because
right.
it was a public asset that was going into private ownership. So that was a principle. And then there was a nod to food hall if you thought you could make it work.
Right. So one of the first things that we did was we liked the idea of a food hall because they were popping up all over in New York and in London. Is we actually did our research in terms of, you know, people would say, well, what's the difference between a food hall and a food court? Well, one of the things that we realized was the size of the vendors, because we had all these, we couldn't go to any retail consultants because no one had ever done this in Toronto. They told us, oh, well, you need 600-700 square feet, as if you're doing a Harvey's or a Taco Bell. But we traveled, went to Madrid, went to Copenhagen, went to Berlin, and we looked at, okay, what are the dimensions of the aisleways? Look at how all these kiosks have seating at them. people are not walking around carrying trays and going to centralized seating, which is more like a food court. So what we really did, and we also realized we have to add a basement. Like, it was the last thing we wanted to do, but we realized that if you're doing these small units of 200, 300, 400 square foot vendors, you need storage space, you need lockers, you need places for the staff to hang up their coats, this kind of thing. So we actually excavated in not the full basement under the food hall, but a partial basement that would be connected to the loading and the underground parking that would then tie everything together.
And act as a back of house. That was a question,
That's
actually.
right.
Thank you for answering that. We have a question that says, what's the breakdown between affordable and market units?
We were asked to do 15 units out of 288, so it's slightly over 5%.
In addition to, and I'll say from the public sector perspective, that we had a full component of the building that was dedicated to the youth shelter. So there was quite a representation
Right.
of housing, social housing in the project. I'll read out this statement here from Kieran Chiba that says, love the space. The human scale of the development is so wonderful and begs the question of density and height. The King West area and this project showcases how intensification can happen at a more comfortable scale. What lessons do you think the wider GTA development community can gain from making the building work from a functional design pro forma to implementation? Don, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. I think the density, the residential density in the building is significant, and that's facilitated in part by the sheer breadth and scale of the urban block. There's two north-south wings connected by an east-west wing, all above the second and third floor of the existing public infrastructure, and that was the heights, as I think was mentioned earlier, were determined by the planning department as part of the RFP process. So we had we were working within that envelope, but we were able to. It took a few studies of how to get the kind of greatest efficiency within that scale, but I think we were able to kind of maximize the densities while keeping light and view and openness and a real human scale to the kind of building as a whole. So it's, again, analysis and understanding of how to maximize the density. It's one typology, but it's a typology that of height and form that works very well within the surrounding, as a focal point within the surrounding emerging residential community.
And I think, like, if I can add, Gary, before you jump in, that both the designer and yourself, Dawn, but the owner of the project, Gary and Eve and Nerez, their willingness to make decisions that were driven by other things than profit, right? Like that, you did have trade-offs, Gary, that you had to make, and it wasn't always just about the bottom line, if I could say that on your
Oh,
behalf.
it's a good point. I mean, we are in the business to make money, but at the same time, we knew walking into this that there was a height limit. And in fact, it was more than a height limit. The city actually had strata planned the air rights above this block. So you could not go to the committee of adjustment, and ask for an extra floor. And I think, it's interesting you mentioned Linda McDonald, because, she was the manager of the West End, and she was the one that always kept, holding the line at, these are the heights we want, 11, 12 stories around there, which makes west of Spadina, I think, personally speaking, much more livable than east of Spadina. But the city also has its typologies of towers, which, I've done, 60 stories at Massey, so we've done towers before, but this was nice because in some ways the stars all aligned in terms of the block being so big. We've never done floor plates this big. I was worried when Dawn was laying it out that from one end of the floor to the other was be like the movie The Shining, because the hallways were so long, but we also did wider hallways than normal, right? So that you didn't, and the way that it was articulated with the ceilings and the lighting, it didn't matter at the end of the day. So in the end, it was a holistic approach that also produced the highest revenue, the highest
Yes.
value. So even though one could say, well, why are you doing 7-foot balconies? They're so expensive. Well, you know what? And that's why we got the dollar per square foot, because even on plan, you looked at it, you could put a dining room table out on your balcony, was amazing. Nobody was offering that.
Thank you so much for that. And so I do think that there's a lot of lessons and we could talk about it for a really long time, but alignment across the stakeholders going into the project, I think was probably, if you want to say, like summarize it, in one statement from my perspective. There's a question here, from a colleague here from the city of Kitchener, Janie Osterveld says, can you please talk about the ownership maintenance relationships as well as how the YMCA came on board with the project, aligning timelines and funding. And then she says, beautiful project. So I don't know if you guys want to start with the ownership maintenance and then I can jump in on the Y piece.
I could jump in, which I probably answer better than Dawn in terms of from a functional point of view. Is it's all separate ownership, as I was mentioning about the strata plan, and right at the beginning, there's shared facility agreements, reciprocal agreements, so that certain things are shared based on proportion of area. So the ramp is shared, the loading is shared, all the heating and cooling and electricity is metered. And there's still a shared facilities committee that still meets regularly to talk about all these things. So I think it's worked out very well. Now, one of the challenges was, to be frank, is that the Y was on a different time schedule than us. Like we built their shell. People were living in the condos, and the Y took 4 years later to finish, but it didn't affect the balance of the building. But that is a challenge in integrating these kind of things, because the Y was getting its funding from Infrastructure Ontario, City of Toronto, and their own money. So, but they own their space. That was one of the criteria right at the beginning, was the Y would own their space.
The Y would own their space, and I can speak to the reason for that. Due to some taxation acts that they have that they needed to get the benefit of to be able to operate efficiently. And I'll just close up with how the Y got into the project, and then we'll end on time and maybe give Don the ability to have any last comments that he'd like to make as well. But the YMCA was there because early days, 2020, 2012 or 2013, the counselor of the day had said, come out to a community meeting and just talk. You don't have any plans yet, but just talk to the community about what they want to see. And the community said, we really need a pool in close distance. We're young, we have growing families. The closest pool is Alex Park. It's not close enough and it's really busy. If you guys could do a pool. And I had thought to myself, and we were talking with our colleagues, like, if we want to do a use that is open to the public, that is functional in the beautiful heritage structure to the south, we actually want to try to bring some sort of daytime population to the project if we can. And so I started brainstorming, cold called the YMCA, like literally wrote a cold email to the then CEO, Medhat Madi, and to my surprise, he answered me. We went and saw him at Yonge and Eglinton, and he made a list and he said, I need a pool. And so we had a match between what the community was asking for and what the Y was asking for. And the Y said, and we also need a list of these other things that to make the project work. They were really clear-headed about what their needs were. And we just put my head down and went at it. And it wasn't easy. There was a ton of hurdles, but put it in as a requirement on the RFP, because we really saw that as an important community asset to make this project whole. But Dawn, closing thoughts to you.
Well, I think, thanks, Salima. I think the issue is this project, I think, illustrates the art of the possible. The art of the possible in the sense that, combining community needs, city policy, the realistic development needs, the kind of opportunities to preserve history and engage new uses, new life, new possibilities that make sense for building, complete residential communities within the deep core and centrality of the city. And that art of the possible, I think, depends on problem solving, open-mindedness, being able to not take the easy way out, but actually work together as a collaborative team of public, private, and groups, and a very skilled private developer team to really do something that I think will have lasting values for the quality of urban placemaking in the community. And I think that's it simply requires an attitude to get it done, and to work together to do it. And I think that's part, hopefully, of the success of this project. So.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Wonderful closing thoughts from Don and Gary. Thank you for all your insights and candor for this conversation, and for everyone that has joined us for this conversation. Just a reminder of all that we have coming up for ULI Toronto, and thank you for sharing the time with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Salima.